You know, sometimes it's the smallest things that bring back the biggest memories. Just this morning, as I was setting the kettle on, same old blue kettle I've had for years, well, this little tune came on the radio. Some old Glenn Miller song. Funny how a melody can carry you clear across the years. And in that moment, it all came rushing back. That day, my wedding day. It's been, 40-some years now. Hard to believe how time slips away, like sand through your fingers. But still, there it was, clear as yesterday. That whole day, all wrapped up in lace and flowers, and something else I've carried with me all this time. Something I never really told anyone. Now, I'm not the kind to spill family matters out in the open. Folks who know me, they'll tell you, I've always kept a tidy house and a tidy heart. But lately, I've been thinking, maybe it's time to share a little piece of my story. Not for the sake of digging up old hurt, no, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it. And these days, sitting here with my tea, I get to thinking, life's too short not to tell the truth of it sometimes. And if you're sitting here with me, listening, well, bless your heart, maybe take a moment, tap that little old like button, or leave me a note in the comments if you feel like sharing a thought or two. And if you'd like to sit with me again sometime, you could always subscribe, you know. No pressure, but I'd sure enjoy the company. Now, where was I? Oh yes, that wedding day. Spring of '85. The kind of day that smelled of fresh rain and lilacs. Mama had been baking all week, bless her. My dress was laid out with such care, and Daddy, well, I think he was more nervous than I was. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And in many ways, it was. Folks dancing, laughing, the clink of glasses. I can still hear the music floating through that old church hall. But life has a funny way of twisting things when you least expect. There was a moment when the truth of something that had been hiding just under the surface, came out. Right there in the middle of all that joy and celebration. And after all these years, after all the birthdays and holidays, the years raising babies and watching the seasons change, that moment still sits here, quiet, but heavy. And maybe that's why I'm telling it now. Because you see, we all carry things unsaid. And sometimes, when you're a little older, a little wiser, you realize it's okay to let a few of those things out into the light. Not to shame or blame, just to make a little more room in the heart, you know. So, if you'll sit a spell with me, I'll tell you what happened that day. Why I held my tongue for 40 years. And why, even now, there's a part of me that wonders if I did the right thing. Well, you'll have to be the judge of that. Shall we begin? I grew up in a little town in Georgia. Not much more than a speck on the map, really. Back then, life moved slower. Folks knew each other, waved when they passed by, shared sugar or eggs when you needed 'em. Summers were long and hot, with cicadas hummin' in the trees, and the air thick with the smell of magnolia. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Mama kept the house neat as a pin, always smelled of fresh biscuits or cornbread. Daddy worked at the mill, came home with sawdust on his boots, tired but smiling. I was the youngest of 3, the only girl, and I suppose I had a soft heart even then. I used to sit on the porch swing in the evenings, listening to Mama hum church songs while she shelled peas, the sky tinted all pink and gold. I'd dream about what my life might be one day. I thought maybe I'd teach school, maybe marry a good man, have a little house with a garden out back. I didn't dream of riches or grand adventures, no, just a life filled with kindness and love. I believed, with all my young heart, that if you treated folks right, the world would treat you the same. That good things came to good people. I held on to that thought, like a favorite ribbon tucked in a drawer. By the time I was a young woman, the world had started changing. It was the late '70s by then. Folks were moving to the cities, taking jobs in offices instead of farms. But in our town, we still did things the old way. Church on Sundays, potluck suppers, barn dances now and again. I worked part-time at the local diner, served up grits and coffee to the regulars, and in the afternoons I'd help Mama with the canning. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and there was comfort in that. That's when I met him. He was new in town, come from upstate to take a job at the bank. Tall, handsome in that clean-cut way, with a nice smile and polite manners. Oh, and how he could dance. We met at one of those barn socials. I remember he asked me for a dance, and my heart just about skipped a beat. I wasn't the only girl taken by him, no sir, but somehow he seemed to notice me. We'd walk by the river on Sunday afternoons, talking about everything and nothing. He'd tell me stories about his folks, his dreams of making a good life. And I'd sit there, listening, thinking maybe, just maybe, my dreams were starting to come true. Back then, I still believed that love was simple. That if two people cared for each other, that was enough. I thought the world was full of second chances, that even when things went wrong, kindness would always bring folks back together. I used to think that trust was something you could wrap around yourself like a warm quilt, that it would hold no matter what storms came. I suppose in my heart, I believed too much in happy endings. But I was young and hopeful like so many girls are. I didn't know yet how complicated hearts could be, or how sometimes even the people you love most can surprise you in ways you never imagined. Looking back now, I can still see that young girl sitting on the porch swing, eyes full of dreams. I didn't know then how life would twist and turn or how strong I'd have to be some days. But maybe it's just as well. We don't always need to know what's ahead. Sometimes it's enough to take the next step with hope in your heart and trust in the people you love. At least, that's what I believed back then. It was a late summer afternoon when he walked into my life for the first time. I still remember the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the dusty sidewalks of town. I'd been helping Mama at the church social that day, setting out pies and pitchers of sweet tea. The whole town seemed to turn out for those afternoons, all gathered under the big oak trees behind the church. That's when I saw him. He wasn't from around here, that much was plain. You could tell by the way he stood, a little straighter, dressed a touch sharper than most of the boys we'd grown up with. Folks said he'd just taken a job at the new bank that opened up near Main Street. I didn't pay it much mind at first. There were always strangers passing through. But then he caught my eye, and for a moment, it was like the rest of the world just faded into a soft blur. I can't rightly explain why my heart gave that little leap. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he surely was. It was something else. The way he looked at me, like he really saw me, not just another small-town girl. And then, as if the Lord himself had nudged him along, he came right over and introduced himself. His name was Samuel. That voice of his was warm, steady. We talked about nothing much at first, the weather, the peach harvest, little things. But I remember thinking I could stand here and listen to him talk all afternoon. I didn't know it then, but that day was the start of a chapter I'd carry with me the rest of my life. After that, I seemed to run into him everywhere. At the diner when I was working the counter, at the feed store when I was picking up seed for Mama's garden. Each time, he'd tip his hat, give me that soft smile. And each time, my heart would flutter just a little bit more. Looking back, I suppose I was falling for him before I even knew it myself. Mama noticed, of course. You couldn't keep much from her. She'd give me that knowing look when I came home with a bit more color in my cheeks. Daddy, well, he was a little slower to warm to the idea, protective as fathers are. But even he had to admit, Samuel was a good man. hardworking, polite, always quick to lend a hand, and kind. That mattered most to me. There was one afternoon, late September, the leaves just startin' to turn. Samuel asked if I'd walk with him down by the river after Sunday service. I remember the sky was clear, the air crisp, and my heart was thumping so hard I thought he must surely hear it. We walked and talked, and somewhere along that path, he reached for my hand. It was such a simple thing, but my world shifted in that moment. I didn't know how or why, but deep inside, I felt it. Life was about to change. I couldn't have put it into words then. I didn't know where it would lead, but something inside me whispered that this was the beginning of something bigger than I could yet see. I suppose that's how it often goes. You meet someone, a stranger at first, and before long they become the very center of your days. I was still that young girl who believed in goodness and trust, and that summer, with Samuel by my side, those dreams seemed more real than ever. Well, now, after Samuel and I were engaged and the whole town seemed to be abuzz with congratulations and whispered excitement, life began to change in ways I hadn't expected. At first it was little things: a late dinner, a missed phone call, an odd look on his face when I asked about work, but those cracks in our everyday routine grew wider by the week. Samuel had taken on extra hours at the bank, traveling into the city on weekdays, and though he'd promised it would only be for a short while, I found myself waiting by the window each evening, my heart fluttering every time a car pulled up the gravel road. Mama noticed the dark circles under my eyes and asked if I was tired, but I smiled and said I was fine, just a little worried about Samuel's health. Inside, though, I felt a knot of fear tightening in my chest. I tried to brush it away with prayers and long walks through the garden, but the silence in our home grew louder with every passing day. My parents were supportive, bless their hearts, but they didn't fully understand what it felt like to be pulled between love and uncertainty. Daddy would sit on the porch with me, drawling quietly on his pipe, asking if everything was all right, and I'd manage a shaky laugh and say, "Oh, it's nothing, just war." But then I'd feel tears well up, and I'd turn my gaze away. Even my sister, sweet as she is, tried to cheer me with busy chatter about bridesmaids and wedding favors, not knowing that each mention of the big day felt like salt in a fresh wound. The girls down at the diner where I worked began to gossip about Samuel's long hours and the new young teller who seemed ever so friendly to him, and though I told myself I wouldn't listen, I'd catch snippets of their hushed voices. "Poor thing, I don't trust her." "I'd keep my eyes open if I were you." My cheeks would flush, and I'd hurry away, heart pounding, hoping they didn't see the ache in my eyes. The first time I confronted Samuel, he was leaning against the kitchen counter, backlit by the summer sun slipping through the window. He looked so tired, and yet when I asked why he hadn't come home for supper, he brushed my concern aside. "Just a bit of paperwork, my love," he said, offering me a tired smile. I wanted to believe him. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, mumbling about deadlines and schedules. In that moment, I felt a storm of confusion and shame. Shame that I was doubting him. Shame that I felt so alone in my doubts. I wanted to keep faith, to trust the man I loved, but my own thoughts betrayed me. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the quilt on my bed, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering if I would ever be enough anymore. And then came the day when Susan, that pretty teller everyone whispered about, slid into the diner just as my shift was ending. She smiled at me so sweetly, like she and I were best friends, and she said she'd just seen Samuel leaving his office with her in his arms. I don't rightly remember how I got home that night. My legs felt like lead, my head spinning. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but all I could do was slip through the back door and bury my face in Mama's quilt. I was angry at Samuel for betraying me, angry at Susan for smiling like nothing was wrong, and most of all, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. Fear and doubt clashed inside me, leaving me too paralyzed to say a word when Samuel finally came home, trailing apologies like confetti at a funeral. Throughout those days, I battled between wanting to smash every plate in the house and collapsing into tears with relief whenever Samuel swore he loved me and begged for my forgiveness. My parents urged me to stand up for myself, to demand respect, but my heart ached for the quiet life I'd always dreamed of. The tension between what I felt I deserved and what I was willing to forgive turned into a dilemma more painful than any I'd known. Society told me to keep my marriage intact, my friends told me to trust my husband's love, and my own heart told me to protect myself from further hurt. I found myself at a crossroads, torn between tradition and truth, between loyalty and self-respect, and each breath felt heavier than the last. I remember the moment like it was carved into my very bones. The band was playing "Here Comes the Bride," and I was halfway down the aisle, feeling my dress sweep across the polished floor. My heart was full of joy, full of hope, full of everything a bride's heart should be. And then I saw them. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the way Samuel's gaze flickered across the church, landing on her, on that same young teller, wearing her pale pink dress, leaning close enough that I could almost hear her whisper. It was as if the world around me blurred, the flowers, the pews, the faces of my family, fading into shadows. There was a sudden hush in my ears, and I swear I felt the seconds stretch into minutes. I could almost see the hands of the clock above the altar hovering, suspended in disbelief. I don't know how I made it to the front. I don't know how I kept my feet from giving way beneath me. I stood there, radiating white lace and pearls, but inside I was flooded with ice-cold dread. When Samuel reached for my hand, I felt a tremor run through my bones. I looked up at him, ready to smile, ready to promise forever. Instead, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, a flicker of guilt, a shadow I couldn't ignore. My breath caught in my throat, and the words he spoke, his vow of love, sounded distant, hollow. In that moment, my world split in two, the dream I had built in my heart and the stark reality crawling in on silent feet. The music faded. The guests leaned forward, curious. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I could hardly make out my own name when the minister called it. I felt the ring tremble in my palm as I pressed it onto his finger, and I could almost taste the bitterness of every unspoken doubt I'd ever had. When our hands were finally joined, I forced a smile, thin, brittle, and whispered back my vows. But each word cracked like glass on my tongue. I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my heart were being squeezed by a vice. I remember thinking, how can I stand here, pledging my life to a man who has already betrayed my trust? And then, just as the minister pronounced as husband and wife, the flash of her face in the window behind me, her knowing smile, everything snapped into sharp relief. The choir burst into song, but it felt like a roar in my head. I watched Samuel place the ring on my finger, feeling the metal burn against my skin. In that instant, I realized I had lost more than my belief in him. I had lost my innocence, my sense of safety, the comforting ignorance I had carried with me. Everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty shattered to pieces on that sacred floor. I stumbled through the recessional, shaking as the weight of my dress and my new name settled on my shoulders. The congregation rose, clapping polite smiles, believing they were celebrating. I felt as though I were walking underwater, each step heavy with grief and anger and sheer disbelief. Samuel squeezed my hand at the door, leaned in to kiss me, but I turned away, tears blurring my vision. I remember the look on his face, panic, regret, desperation, like he was witnessing the death of something precious right in front of him. And in a way he was. That day, I died just a little bit. The part of me that believed in fairy tales and happily ever afters withered away, leaving behind a woman who knew the sharp sting of broken promises. I don't recall how I made it to the car, how I kissed my parents goodbye, how I rode to the reception in silence. At the reception, the room was bright with laughter and chatter, but for me it was a vast cavern of loneliness. I sipped my champagne, watched Samuel dance with her, his other bride of the moment, and I felt a hollow ache rise in my chest. The band struck up another tune, and I could almost hear the clock ticking, counting down to the moment when I would finally decide what to do with this new, broken heart. That was the turning point, the second I realized that no matter how much love I had for him, no matter the promises we had made, I could not pretend to be blind any longer. I could not stand beside him and smile while my soul bled in silence. That day changed me. I emerged from that church not as the naive girl who walked in, but as a woman armed with bitter wisdom. I understood then that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go, and that the hardest vows to break are the ones you make with your heart. The clock restarted after the ceremony, but for me, time would never tick the same way again. In the days and weeks that followed, I felt as though I'd been emptied of everything I thought defined me. I moved through the morning light with a hollow weight in my chest, the world around me strangely distant. The little blue kettle on the stove sat cold and silent, and when I poured my tea, I barely tasted it. I went through the motions of cooking and cleaning, but each task felt like wading through molasses. The garden outside my window carried on without me. Roses bloomed, birds sang at dawn, but I could only watch through the glass, as if I were observing someone else's life. Inside, there was a vast, echoing silence where laughter and love once lived. I found myself sinking into routines I had never questioned before, simply to avoid the emptiness waiting beneath every quiet moment. I would sit at the kitchen table and trace the grain of the wood with my fingers, willing the memories to fade, but they persisted like stubborn ghosts. I missed the way I used to believe in simple joys, in the promise of tomorrow, and I mourned the loss of the innocent girl who once saw kindness in every face. My faith in people felt fragile, like a porcelain teacup on a shaky table. I didn't trust my own heart to feel joy, fearing each smile might crack it further. Nights were the worst. Sleepless hours stretched long, and I would lie awake listening to the house settle around me. The shadows in the corners felt alive, reminding me of that moment in the church when everything changed. I tried to pray, but the words caught in my throat, empty pleas to a God I wasn't sure was listening. Sometimes I would rise and stand by the window, staring at the empty road, waiting for a sign that life would ever feel normal again. Friends reached out, Mama brought casseroles, my sister sent letters, neighbors knocked on the door with gentle concern, but I had no words to offer except whispered thanks. I felt as though I didn't belong in the conversations about bridal showers and baby showers anymore. My place in that world had shifted, and I was no longer sure where I fit. I began to wander through old photographs, brushing dust from the frames, looking for the moment where everything went right. But each picture held its own ache, smiling faces caught mid-laughter, hands clasped in promise, and I would close the album with a soft sob. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons changed without me noticing. The vibrant greens of summer faded to the golden hush of autumn, and I realized I had hardly stepped outside. One morning, I found myself staring at my reflection in the hallway mirror, startled by the stranger I saw, eyes rimmed with sorrow, shoulders stooped under invisible burdens. I recognized that woman as me, and pity welled up inside, warm and sharp. It was then I made a decision. I would not let the sorrow define the rest of my days. I began to coax myself into small acts of care, watering the garden, setting the table with fresh flowers, reading a line or two from a favorite book. It was like dipping my toes into cold water. The shock was enough to jolt me, but not so much to overwhelm. Slowly, ever so slowly, I began to feel the stirrings of something I thought lost: curiosity, a longing for connection, a flicker of the hope I once carried so freely. I didn't pretend the wound was healed. In fact, I kept it close, like a reminder of the strength I gained simply by surviving. And with time, I understood that loss and love can coexist, that silence after the storm can teach you to listen to your own heart. I emerged from that dark season forever changed, carrying a new kind of wisdom, a gentle caution, and a tender gratitude for each sunrise that found me still standing. One crisp morning, as I was kneeling by the hydrangeas, tending their thirsty blooms, a small, trembling voice called my name from the porch. It was Millie, the neighbor's little girl, her ragged doll clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She said her own grandmother hadn't come by in weeks, and that she missed her terribly and didn't know what to do. In that moment, something inside me stirred, a gentle tug at the corner of my heart that felt like sunlight slipping through stubborn clouds. I remembered how lost I'd felt when the world seemed to implode around me, how empty each room had looked in the aftermath of my own heartbreak, and I realized that perhaps I had a gift now: lessons learned in grief, empathy honed in silence, that could help another soul find her way again. So I smiled, took Millie's hand, and led her inside for a lemonade and a story or two about summers when I was her age. The simple act of listening to her, offering comfort in the shape of shared memories and the promise of a home-cooked meal on Sunday, filled me with a new kind of purpose. As I sat at my old oak table, stirring sugar into her glass, I saw hope reflected in her wide eyes and felt it renew a spark in my own. Soon after, I found myself volunteering to teach at the local community center, a small class of children and elders alike who gathered each week to learn to quilt or knit, but more importantly, to share their stories. I would bring my basket of yarn and needles, and as I taught them to pair stitches with patterns, I found my own heart weaving together again the tattered edges of faith and people. With each clack of the needles, I whispered to myself that life still had beauty to offer, that the act of creation could heal the deepest wounds. I watched Mr. Thompson, the retired soldier next door, stitch his stubborn quilt block and break into tears as he told us about the friend he'd lost in the war. And I saw Mrs. Gwynn, who had come to this country as a young bride, find laughter again as she worked through a twisted stitch. And I understood, in a profound way, that this new season of my life wasn't about erasing the pain of the past, but about transforming it into something warm, something that could wrap around another. In the quiet moments between classes, I began jotting down thoughts in my notebook, memories I had once hidden away, now blossoming into the beginnings of a memoir I dared to imagine. I realized that by sharing my story, I might offer others the courage to speak their own truths. That tremor of fear I'd felt so many years ago, the belief that revealing my wounds would only invite more pain, gave way to a quiet confidence that vulnerability could be its own kind of strength. And so I wrote about the day the clock stopped at the altar, about the long seasons of silence, and about this very morning when a child's need reached out and pulled me back into the world of living. Each evening, as I walked back from the community center with my satchel of leftover yarn, I paused at the gate to watch the sun set in a blaze of coral and gold. It reminded me that endings could be beautiful, that each setting sun promised a new dawn. I carried home not just the weight of needles and thread, but the warmth of shared smiles and the renewed certainty that my journey still had purpose. The ache in my chest had not vanished, but it had softened, becoming a gentle reminder of resilience. And as I closed the door behind me each night, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for this second chance at hope, for the opportunity to knit my own heart back together by helping others mend theirs. I remember the morning I finally made my choice. The sky was pale and quiet, the kind of early light that neither promised thunder nor sunshine, but simply held its breath as if waiting for me to speak. I stood in the little guest room where I had hidden the box for all those years, a simple wooden chest, worn smooth at the corners, filled with yellowed letters, faded photographs, and the pearl earrings I wore on that wedding day. My hands trembled as I opened the lid, and for a moment the past poured over me like rain, each memory heavier than the last. I could almost hear the echo of my own voice from long ago, whispering vows I no longer believed in, see the ghost of the girl I once was, brimming with hope. But this morning felt different. Instead of recoiling from the pain, I stepped forward into it, drew in a steady breath, and let my heart crack open one last time. I reached into that box and lifted each treasure in turn, first the earrings, then the stack of photographs with smiles that no longer fit me, then the letters written in a hand I had loved so dearly. One by one I laid them on the bedspread, and as I did, I felt the weight begin to lift. I saw those things not as proofs of betrayal, but as reminders of how far I had come. And then I did something I never imagined I could, that simple, symbolic act that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I took the letters and cast them into the fireplace, watching each one curl and blacken, releasing words I had held against my chest for decades. I dropped the photographs into the flames next, their colors melting into glowing embers, like old scars burning away in the heat of my resolve. Finally, I placed the earrings in a velvet pouch and set them gently on the dresser, not to discard them, but to honor them as a relic of who I once was and as a testament to who I had become. In that moment, the room felt warmer, the air lighter, and I understood with absolute clarity that my past would not destroy me. It had shaped me, made me wiser, stronger, more compassionate than I'd ever known. I knelt beside the hearth and listened as the fire crackled, each pop of the flame a declaration of freedom. I felt tears stream down my cheeks, tears of sorrow for the loss I had endured, and tears of gratitude for the growth it had inspired. Rising to my feet, I pressed a hand to my heart and spoke the words I had carried in secret all these years. I chose to live on, without resentment, without regret, just on. And as I spoke, the whole house seemed to inhale, as if the very walls were celebrating my decision. I stepped outside onto the porch, the morning air cool against my skin, and looked out at the garden I had tended through seasons of joy and pain. The roses were already budding, promising new blooms, and I felt in my bones that my own life was ready to blossom again. In that quiet dawn, I felt both the weight of what had been and the lightness of what could be, and I knew that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying my story with me, not as a burden, but as a lantern to guide my way. And so I turned back toward the house, my steps steady, my heart unburdened, ready to embrace whatever came next with an open hand and an open soul. I used to believe that life was a straight path, that if you planted seeds of kindness and watered them with trust, you would reap the garden of endless joy. I thought that the worst of human hearts could be tamed by love, that forgiveness was simple, and that tomorrow always held a promise of something better. But I learned, as the years unfolded, that life is not linear and that gardens sometimes wither even under the sunniest skies. I learned the hard way that trust can be fractured in an instant, that betrayal can arrive masked in the gentlest smile, and that forgiveness does not erase the ache of yesterday. Yet through that pain, I came to understand something far deeper, that our wounds are not simply scars to hide but chapters in a story that shapes who we become. I came to see that resilience is not the absence of sorrow but the ability to stand fully present with it, to welcome each emotion without letting it define us, and to gather pieces of our brokenness into a mosaic more beautiful than the flawless image we once projected. Today, when I sit on my porch with a cup of tea and watch the sun slip below the horizon, I carry within me the knowledge that even the most shattered heart can heal in unexpected ways. I carry the tender awareness that compassion for oneself is the cornerstone of true compassion for others. That boundaries born of self-respect are not walls to keep people out, but guardians that ensure we do not lose ourselves in the service of another's shortcomings. I learned that redemption is possible not only for those who hurt us, but equally for the fear inside our own souls, the fear that holds us back from taking risks or speaking our truth. And I learned that the greatest act of courage is choosing vulnerability again after life has shown us all its harsh edges. In sharing my story now, I wish not to lecture or dictate a moral formula, but to offer a glimpse of a kinder, more honest way to walk through this world. Perhaps you too are holding on to a memory like a weight that keeps you fixed in place. Perhaps you believe that time cannot heal this particular pain, that sorrow is your only companion. But maybe, just maybe, it is time to stop waiting for a life that was promised long ago and start planting seeds for the life that is waiting here and now. Maybe it is time to tend to your own heart, to give yourself permission to let go of the chapters that no longer serve you, and to write new ones with intention and hope. The truth I carry now is simple yet profound. Our past does not own us, it teaches us. Our pain is a teacher, and our choices afterward are the lesson. May you find in your own story the courage to embrace what has been, the wisdom to learn from it, and the grace to move forward with an open heart. And now here we are at the end of the story, yet somehow it feels more like a beginning. I sit in my favorite rocker, the one on the porch that creaks just so when I lean back, and I think about how these memories full of heartache and hope are not just echoes of a day gone by, but pieces of the life I'm living right now. I want you to know that what I've shared isn't just about a long ago wedding or a betrayal that cut me to the bone. It's about every sunrise that found me stronger, every quiet moment when I chose to breathe in courage instead of sorrow, and every gentle act of kindness toward myself and others that reminded me there is beauty in second chances. I feel a warmth in my chest as I recall the faces who held my hand when mine shook with doubt, and the simple joys that taught me resilience, like a child's laughter reminding me of the promise of play, or the soft green of new leaves telling me that life renews itself even after the harshest winter. And I think of you, dear listener, sitting there with your own dreams and your own scars, and I wonder what part of your heart needs that same gentle nudge toward hope. Because stories like mine are alive today in kitchens and living rooms all over, where someone is gathering courage to speak their truth, where another is learning to trust again, and where love, in all its complicated glory, continues to shape who we are and who we might become. So tell me, what do you think? Should true love ever come back around? Is it possible that the person who wounded us most deeply still holds a place in the quiet chambers of our hearts, waiting for a chance to show they've changed? Or do we find our truest self only when we let go and forge new paths? Sometimes, when I sit here as the sun dips low and paints the sky a tender pink, I swear I hear the faint whisper of a memory, like the rustle of a silk dress and the echo of a vow I once made. And in those moments, I believe he still remembers me too. But whether he does or not, I have come to understand that the question isn't just about him or me. It's about all of us learning to carry our stories with grace, to honor both the pain and the healing, and to step boldly into each new day with an open heart. Because life doesn't end with the final page of a sad chapter, it simply turns to the next, with its own lessons and its own tender mercies. And as I rock here in the gentle evening breeze, I send this thought out to you. May you find the strength to forgive where forgiveness is due, the courage to love where love belongs, and the wisdom to know that some answers don't come all at once but unfold in the quiet hope of living. Sometimes I think he still remembers, and sometimes I think that even more than that, I remember who I have become. And maybe that, my friend, is the truest love story of all.